Okay, hello everyone and welcome. I am Kristin Peck. I'm a proud alumna of Columbia Business School, a member of the Deming Center Advisory Board and CEO of Zoetis, the world's largest animal health company. And it is my pleasure and my honor to be here today for a conversation with my friend, Hubert Joly, around his timely new book, The Heart of Business: Leadership Principles for the Next Era of Capitalism. So I had the pleasure of getting to know Hubert when he was awarded the 2019 Deming Cup for operational excellence, honoring his extraordinary turnaround of Best Buy. As CEO, he took the company from its ashes to an employer, innovator, and sustainability leader, not by cutting costs, but by creating purpose, continuous improvement, and putting thousands of colleagues at the center of everything they did. Because he firmly believed the role of a company is not simply to generate profitable revenue, but to be a force for good to its customers, its employees, and its community. And as he has said, if you can connect the search for meaning of the individual with the purpose of a company, then magical things happen. And in the heart of business, Hubert shares his personal recipe for unleashing human magic, which we'll delve into today. So, having devoured his book in one weekend, I can attest that The Heart of Business is not the typical company case study. It's Hubert's personal playbook that touches at the core of why we work and the human connections that ignite our spirit. So one of my favorite quotes that you put forth in the beginning of the book is, "Work is love made visible," by Khalil Gibran, which I think encapsulates the key messages of the book so well, and quite the contrast to the famous Mark Twain quote that work is a necessary evil to be avoided. So Hubert, it is my pleasure to have you here, and I want to thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Kristin. I so look forward to the conversation, and thank you, of course, to Columbia and the Deming Center, that are so close to our heart.
Yes, well, as you know, I loved the book. In fact, after I read it, I told my head of public affairs and communications that I never needed to write a leadership book because you'd encapsulated my philosophy so well, as I told you before. So I am excited to begin our conversation. But first, let's do some quick logistical details for our audience. As you can see, we're doing this meeting as a meeting. So please feel free to keep your video on so we can see each other, but please do keep your mics on mute. I have a lot of things I'd like to discuss with Hubert, but we really want to hear what is on your mind and to get a broader discussion going. So at around 6:30 or so, we're going to open things up and take your questions. So just keep an eye on the chat box for guidelines from the Deming Center team on how to participate in the Q&A, and we'll keep things running seamlessly throughout the hour. And now, Hubert, let's get started, shall we? So why don't we start by talking about what inspired you to write The Heart of Business? I know purpose, passion, and dare I say it, love, have all been at the core of your leadership. Can you describe for us what purposeful leadership looks like for you and what drove you to write your book about it?
Yeah, and I first want to say that I look forward to reading your book because I want to have your personal fingerprint on this topic. You're an extraordinary leader, and we'll try to make this a two-way conversation because I think everybody is going to be excited to learn from you as well. What drove me to write the book? You know, it was going to be relevant before the COVID crisis. It's even more so now. It's obvious to everyone today that the world we live in is facing a multifaceted crisis, right? It's of course, a health crisis, but also economic, societal, racial, environmental, geopolitical tensions, you name it. And, the definition of madness is we do the same thing and we hope for a different outcome. We have to embrace a new formula. And what I have uncovered over the years during my journey is a formula that I think most people agree with today, but is so powerful. It's the idea that at the heart of business is the idea that you pursue a noble purpose. You put people at the center and create an environment where you can unleash that human magic that you were talking about. You embrace all stakeholders. in some kind of declaration of interdependence. And then you treat profit as an outcome, not the goal. And, you know, in my FBI most wanted list, there's Milton Friedman. This has got to stop. And I think most people now embrace this, and certainly your company, you and your company are great examples of this. I think we're all travelers on this journey, right? Because this requires, to a very large extent, revisiting how we lead. So the how is really important. I felt that with the success that Best Buy had, this gave me some credibility in a platform to talk about what it takes to lead from a place of purpose and with humanity. And I was very passionate about sharing this. Not that I have a corner on wisdom around this, but I felt that a few things to share, and I wanted to help our fellow travelers on that journey.
Well, I do think your book is quite unique, and you talked in the book about the journey from head to heart. And I think that we've all had those pivotal moments in our lives when we find our purpose, what we're meant to do, or what we're, not programmed to achieve, but what really means something to us. Can you talk to us a little bit about when you discovered that for yourself in your journey? I mean, it's a really compelling part of the book, at least for me. How did you figure out what that was for you?
Yeah, and I think for all of us, it's a journey, right? It takes multiple years, multiple milestones, and revisiting and refining. I did start as a hard-charging, deeply analytical McKinsey consultant who thought it was all about solving problem and maximizing performance. But Kristin, at some point, to quote David Brooks, I had reached the top of my first mountain, right? 20 years ago. I'd been a partner at McKinsey & Company. I was on the executive team of a large French multinational media entertainment company. And at the top of that first mountain, there was nothing. There was emptiness. There was no meaning. There was no joy. There was interesting business problems, but no joy. And so that led me to want to slow down and step back. So call it my midlife crisis. And I was very fortunate because a former client of mine at McKinsey led me to want to do the spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola, of course, the founder of the Jesuits. And there's many ways, you can revisit your life and look at what gives you energy, what drains you, contemplate, who you are, who you want to be, and what your calling in life is. I was fortunate to be able to do these exercises over a 2-year period of time. And at the end, it was clear to me. I was, when I was going to retire, or during my eulogy, I didn't want to talk about, at what age I was going to have made VP, or, how much money I would have made. It was a calling of service. It's the golden rule that's the core of all of our purposes. And over time, I was then able to connect that with my job as a CEO. And that's really very, very powerful. And I think one of the things we've learned during this COVID crisis is that this is a time when we need to slow down and take time to think about how we want to lead, what are the principles, how we want to be remembered, and then also take care of ourselves. But I bet we'll come back to this, but that was my pivot moment 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, it was an inspiring part of the book. And if we can, let's continue on the theme of purpose. And you talked about unleashing human magic in the pursuit of a noble purpose. So what do you mean by that for people who haven't had a chance to read the book yet? What is the secret formula of doing that right?
Well, because I'm French, it is a recipe. Voila, of course. So there again, we have to step back in the same way that Milton Friedman is on my most wanted list. I think Bob McNamara is also the former Secretary of Defense and former head of Ford is also on my list. This idea that in business life, you take a bunch of smart people, they create a smart plan, you tell other people what to do, put incentives in place, KPIs, and hope that something is going to happen. We know it doesn't work. I think that motivation, we know it is intrinsic, and hopefully all of us have experienced situations where we have like a spring in our step. We're full of energy in our work, right? There's this question of work. Is work a curse because some dude sinned in paradise, or is it something we do so that we can do something else? Or as you said, is it part of our search for meaning? Work is love made visible. I think that in our heart, because work is so important, if we can connect what drives us with our job, then something fabulous happens. In order for this to take place, I think there's 5 ingredients, at least in my cookbook. The first ingredient is making sure that as a leader, you're clear about your purpose, but also you're also curious about the purpose of people around you. And I remember a store general manager in Boston, he would ask every one of the associates in his store, what is your dream? At Best Buy or outside of Best Buy, what is your dream? Okay, write it down in the break room. My job as the store GM is to help you achieve your dream. And so that's the first ingredient. I call it connecting dreams. The second one is about creating an environment where there's true, authentic human connections. Because at the end of the day, if we step back, what is a company? A company is a human organization made of individuals working together, right? And so these human connections is essential. And I will always remember, Kristin, a young associate one day telling me that his life changed the day a manager recognized him and took an interest in him, because he felt he belonged and he could be, the biggest version of himself. And if I think about my compatriot René Descartes of the Cartesian philosophy, who said, "I think, therefore I am," I think he was wrong. It's "I am seen. I am seen, therefore I am." And if as leaders we can create an environment where everybody feels seen, of course, which leads to the discussion around diversity and inclusion. Maybe we'll get back to this, but that's why diversity and inclusion is so important, is that everybody feels seen and respected and they belong. Autonomy is the third ingredient. Making sure that people feel that they have the power to create the right solution for the part that they're responsible for, and how we push how pushing decision making down as far as possible in the organization and empowering people. The fourth one is around mastery. People like to grow and master skills, which in my book happens one employee at a time. So it's not none of this is mass. And then the fifth one is around growth and creating a growth environment. But so these are the 5 ingredients. I'd be curious to understand how because I know Zoetis is this impressive company, great performance, great culture, and you do employ some of these ingredients. So I'll just take a break while you tell us.
I share many of the same. As I said, if I could have written a book in many respects, I would have written probably not as eloquently or as many great quotes maybe as you. But I think at the heart, when I meet with investors or with colleagues, I say the same thing. We have a phenomenal company, an incredible portfolio of products, but at the end of the day, what makes Zoetis are our colleagues.
Yes.
We may have products that have patent protection and all things like that, but at the end of the day, it's our colleagues who come to work every day, who don't just show up, but they strive. They put their heart into what they do. And obviously we can talk about the last year. Never was that more clear than the personal challenges that every colleague of ours faced, whether they were coming into a manufacturing site or an R&D site, or whether they were working from home. I think you get a sense of whether or not your culture really means something, whether colleagues feel you authentically care for their situation. And, I often say we might have all been in the same storm in COVID, but we did not each have the same boat. And people needed to know that you saw their boat and they were seen for the situation that they had. So I was incredibly grateful last year for the perseverance and resilience of our colleagues. But I think it has everything to do at Zoetis with the culture and the core beliefs that guide us.
And I think that crises are defining moments, right? This is when sometimes we have our finest moments. So and last year was an extraordinary year for you guys. Maybe give us an illustration of what it meant last year to lead from a place of purpose and with humanity and really seeing the employees.
Well, it was interesting because I was a new CEO, as some people may know. I just started in January, and I certainly had this great plan of how the year was going to go. And I guess I never imagined that year that I'd be sending weekly notes to my colleagues. I'm a working mother, at home with 2 teenage kids, who was trying to figure out how they were going to balance it. How are you going to set structure? And I think it allowed leaders across our company to become more human. We were in people's homes. They saw your lives. And for leaders, who were willing to be authentic and, talk about what it was really like, colleagues felt it was okay. I mean, I often talk about a story of my head of the US, Tim Beddington, was stranded at his in-laws in North Carolina on his way moving. We just hired him. He was just starting. And they had 3 children, and his wife was taking care of the 2 for school, and he had his 5-year-old son there. And it changed the way people saw him as a leader. And they realized he was a person with a child that he had to care for. And I think it's those moments in a company where people can be, more honest and authentic, allows other colleagues to speak up and feel the same way. And I think, it's just really important to a culture where, people feel they're seen and they feel comfortable speaking up and bringing their whole selves to work.
And in my sense, Kristin, is that there's no going back, right? Once we've seen our coworkers, colleagues, as human beings with their spouses or in-laws or dogs and cats, and which are good, dogs and cats and cows and Wi-Fi problem, there's no going back. There always will be human beings. So that's one of the things that makes me optimistic, is that there's been a reset of how we think about organizations.
I think one of the interesting examples, we talked about the crisis just now of COVID, but you certainly walked into a crisis when you decided to take over. And I think one of the most interesting things about, I guess, the magic that you unleashed is, after your first year, you were flat, which doesn't sound great maybe here, but was like just radically, impressive. Most people thought you were going to go out of business at that time. And you did all that without headcount reductions. And one of the most compelling stories in the book, honestly, was the colleague that said, that year was one of the best years of their life. So turning around a company, hoping to not go bankrupt, was one of the most inspiring years of his life. So tell me a little bit about what that, how that came to be.
Yeah, because sometimes these, noble principles of leading with purpose and humanity, we say maybe that's good when everything is fine, right? And then when it's tough, we go back to being hard-nosed. And in 2012, the context of Best Buy, as some of us we will remember, as you said, is everybody thought we were going to die, right? There was 0 buy recommendation on the stock, very different from your situation. And the advice I was getting from analysts and some investors was cut, close stores, fire people. And the entire story of the Best Buy turnaround for the first 3 or 4 years, when we were trying to save the company and set it back on its feet, was a human-centric approach. It started with listening to frontliners, right? Because what we were trying to do is fix what was broken, right? Strategically, there was nothing wrong, but it's that we were not operating at our best. So as you and I know, the best place where to find out what's not working is on the front line. And so my first week on the job was spent working in a store in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and really asking genuinely the associates and the store GM, what's working, what's not working, what do you need? And back to this, I am seen or I am respected, listening to the frontliners and then doing something about it, right? With our say-do ratio was really important. Making some people changes at the top, because I'm a bit of a Maoist, and I believe that fish rot from the head. So sometimes you have to, the approach to change management, maybe to change management. So it starts with people. It's also ends with people. So back to your point about headcount reduction, in my turnaround manual, the first priority is grow the revenue, because it's amazing what revenue growth can do. And if you're going to cut costs, focus on non-salary expenses, which is the vast majority of the cost structure. And if you can reduce the non-salary expenses, usually, and we have many, many examples of that, it can be good for the customer and good for the employees and good for the company. And only cut headcount as a last resort. And so we did have over time some headcount reduction, but it was really the minority, and it was never, the situation where company X announces 10,000 or 20,000 headcount reduction and share price goes up. We never emphasized this, and most of the time we were able to redeploy people, because with turnover you can actually, and in a dynamic environment. And then it's also people-centric, because all of us are very smart, right? So at least my journey was, I thought my job as a leader was to come up with the right answer. No, that's not what it is. Our job as a leader is, to a very large degree, to create energy so that the organization can move, and then you have the kind of outcome that you were talking about with this associate. And creating energy means co-creating the plan with the team, right? It means getting going, celebrating small and early wins, talking about problems. If yes, of course there's problems. So let's talk about them and let's solve them together. And so it's a very different lens on, how you approach, driving the performance of the company, not telling people what to do, but creating this environment where they can be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, I love some of your examples you gave of what it means to truly listen and co-create. I mean, the don't return the pen and the how to store the TV. I mean, you never would have guessed you could save that much money on indoor TVs by just changing how you store them. And I would never have thought to store a TV that way. But one of the things you were talking about in your recipe that you referenced before was around autonomy,
Yes.
which resonates really strongly for me because, as you know, one of our core beliefs at Zoetis is run it like you own it. And at least I found in my career that, when a manager tries to do the job of someone or tells them exactly how to do their job, the colleague really gets disengaged and, just do what the manager says, but they're not really in it. Versus letting a manager really encourage a team to co-create and come up with a solution. So talk to me a little bit about, how you drove that autonomy throughout Best Buy.
And of course, I'm going to ask you how you're doing it because it's one of your, signatures. Sometimes, when the ship is sinking, there are situations where the captain of the ship has to make decisions. And early on in our journey, I was making decisions like matching Amazon prices or investing in online, investing in the supply chain, partnering with Samsung and so forth. But when we moved to our second phase, which was much more growth oriented and about creating, an organization that employees and customers and shareholders would love, if we had been limited to what I was going to decide, we would have gone nowhere. So at some point, I shared with the team, there's only 4 or 5 decisions I'm responsible for. Okay. So it's the overall strategy for the company, of course, who is on the team, the culture, and major investments. Okay. Acquisitions. That's it. The rest, there's some cases where I'd like to be consulted. So, if you're going to work on brand identity, positioning, I'd love for, if you're in charge of the brand to maybe consult with me, keep me informed and so forth. Or if you're trying to decide the dividend policy, maybe you consult with me. But what we did was key to the Unleash was to push as many decisions down as possible, as far down as possible, and be clear about the decision-making process. This "and" is really important because before, if a senior executive or an executive, period, would raise their eyebrow and say, I'm not sure, it would stop everything because people assumed they had a veto power. And so we said, no, you're in charge. You encouraged to collect inputs, including from this executive or that executive, if you feel it's appropriate, but you're in charge. And so there's a big difference between direction and input. And as leaders, we have to be careful. Sometimes when we say, maybe we should consider doing this, people interpret this so, Kristin wants us to do this, right?
Right.
So we have to be really careful. And so that was a huge unleash. And of course, then we moved to agile teams that were completely empowered to do their MVPs and run with, their projects. So big unleash. But as I said, it's one of your signatures, right? Run it like you own it. How do you do that? How do you make this happen?
Well, I always say culture is what people do, not what they say. So it's nice that we say it, but I think you see it in every, little and big decision. And in the last year and a half, it started with how we were going to approach COVID, which was we set guiding principles as a company, which were really high, which was really high level. We're going to make sure that our colleagues are safe and more importantly, feel safe, which is not always the same thing. And that was it. It was really pretty simple. And then let your local leaders decide how you do that. Because it looked quite different in China in March or China in June when they were almost back at work, or Europe or, the US. But it also meant if we were going to accelerate our digital and data strategy, which is really important to us, we couldn't micromanage that. We just need to let teams go. We need to say what we needed. Can you find a solution for how we engage? We were launching our single largest product, Simparica Trio, in the history of our company. It's a parasiticide with triple combinations, flea tick heartworm. super exciting, and the launch was April. So our field force couldn't go out. And so overnight, we just needed to empower teams. Don't worry about what it costs. Just tell me and give me a solution to engage with my customers and put it out there. So it's in those moments that teams, I mean, it was just so inspiring to see how teams really pivoted incredibly quickly to create entire tools that we never had before, and just did it. And I think it's the trust that, you know, that they knew they had, that their manager wasn't gonna, I think if we'd had all the time in the world, I'm sure we would have micromanaged more than we did. But, you know, in certain ways, I think organizations genuinely during COVID learned you don't need to control as many things as you thought you did. So if we may, because in about 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to move to the group Q&A. But there's one topic that I think is timely that I wanted to talk to you about. And as you get into the heart of business, it's sort of in a capitalist society where success is often measured in numbers, where customers, certainly in your business, you know, might switch, you know, retailers for a few pennies. How do you create a purposeful corporation and also manage sort of the need for corporations to, you know, provide a good return for their shareholders? I mean, we're seeing a lot of, you know, tension right now as you do that. So talk to me a little bit about your philosophy in that space.
Yeah, and the philosophy is a philosophy I learned a long time ago. It's to treat profit as an outcome. So, you know, one of the things I learned from a client is that 98%, it was very precise, of the questions that are asked as either or are better answered as ands. So you have, I think in this world, we have to refuse the choice between, you know, treating our employees well, treating our customers well, and treating our shareholders well. In fact, it's by treating our employees well and our customers well that we create a great financial outcome, you know, for our shareholders. I do believe that it's better to treat profit as an outcome and an imperative than the goal, because if you treat it as the goal, it narrows your mind and it misses the point that you have to look at drivers. It's like if my medical doctor would only be focused on my temperature, you know, I wouldn't want, you know, so because maybe you'll put the thermometer in the fridge, right? So I don't want that. And so I think it starts with purpose. And purpose, it's not about philanthropy, it's not about ESG. It's about, you know, finding the company's noble purpose. It's in my view, it's at the intersection of what the world needs, what are the needs that you're trying to address in the world, what you're uniquely good at, what you're passionate about, and how you can make profit. And so then you choose that sweet spot, and that becomes the cornerstone of everything. Now, the purpose has become very, very popular these days. So the danger is for a company to write down their purpose and then nothing happens, right? And of course, we all know it has got to go beyond. And that's where, you know, there's a lot of work on making that purpose the cornerstone of the strategy and coming up with very specific initiatives and strategies in support of that purpose. And then ultimately creating an environment where every employee can write themselves into the story and connect what drives them individually with the purpose of the company. It's the story of the two Masons, right? So that's in Paris in the 12th or 13th century. And there's two Masons that are cutting stones, and you know, there's somebody who asks them, "So what are you doing?" And the first one says, "Cannot you see I'm cutting stones, right? It's pretty obvious." And then ask the other guy and say, "What are you cutting stones?" "No, sir, I'm building a cathedral."
All right, before I move to my final question, I just wanted to let everyone in the audience know that we are moving next to your questions. So to keep things from getting too chaotic, please use the raise hand function in the reaction tab at the bottom of your screen, and Kalpana will call on you when we're ready for your question. So connected to the discussion we were just having, your previous point on putting people first, how do you think a leader can stay connected with the entire team during times of difficulty and downturn? I know you certainly face this in your turnaround. You know, what strategies or tools do you recommend that can help a leader have a finger on the pulse of how their, you know, employees are really doing, and to stay one step ahead? It's certainly, as you look at COVID, how do you make sure they feel safe, heard, and cared for in these uncertain times?
Well, I think, and I loved, you know, the story, the way you talked about the crisis and how you guys went through it at Zoetis. For me, during a lockdown, if you cannot go outside, you have to go inside. And so as a leader, the first thing is to slow down and spend the time to decide, how am I going to lead during this time of crisis? What are the principles? You laid out some principles that should govern our actions. How do I want to be remembered? Do I want to be remembered as somebody who hit the quarterly guidance irrespective of everything else, or somebody who went to the essentials and took care? So you have to start with that. And then in line with that, if all leaders put the emphasis on the safety of their employees and their customers, and not just the health safety, but also the mental health issues. And I think we also some amazing examples of great communication. And in a way, Zoom or Teams, whoever, irrespective of what you use, proved to be extraordinary tools, right? Certainly in a retailer like Best Buy, when Corey was our CEO, another great woman CEO in the club, she's got 1,000 stores in the US. There's no human way to visit physically 1,000 stores in a year, or even in 5 years, or even in 10 years. But in Zoom, you can project yourself in any one of the stores. You can go to China and drop yourself into a meeting. So connecting with, of course, teams, but also individuals with no agenda. Checking, Kristin, how are you doing today? Is there anything in the way? When some companies had to furlough employees, having a really human communication and way to handle this. And at Best Buy, I know Corey, she delayed furloughing employees for as long as humanly possible, because she wanted, the federal programs to kick in, and also for HR to have the time to explain to the furloughed employees, to explain why we're doing this, how they could collect, the benefits, and then continuing to communicate during their furlough time, considering they're still, human beings. You're furloughed, but you're still a human being. So it was the whole humanity. And I think we all learned this. This is hard. I'm not going to say it's easy, which is why the other lesson, I think, from a leadership standpoint, is to make sure that in these times that are so unprecedented, right? I think, Kristin, it's every month there's a new curveball that gets thrown where there's no playbook. So taking care of ourselves as leaders and taking time to, exercise physically, meditate, breathe, journal. There's many different ways to do this, but that's a key priority. So that, because if we want to lead others, we have to lead ourselves and be the best version of ourselves. So I think so many great leadership lessons from this crisis, and so many great role models out there in the world.
No, it's so true. I think I had the opportunity to meet more colleagues given COVID than I would if I had this plan of traveling around the world. But actually, I could do a lot more market visits and team visits and one-on-ones when I didn't have to spend all the time traveling. So I do think there's a lot of lessons for leaders on how to connect with colleagues, to your point, that are quite different. But I mean, the well-being, I continue to worry, I'm hoping it's going to get better soon, but for the well-being of a lot of our colleagues and leaders, it's been a long period. So we are ready now to move to your questions. So again, Kalpana, do you want to give us the first question?
Sure, absolutely. We have Craig Hatkoff, who first raised his hand. So Craig, can you unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question? Hi.
Hi, thank you for having this event today. It's really wonderful. And I just want to, this is a little bit of an open-ended question, Hubert, but clearly you were influenced by Viktor Frankl. And I saw a couple of quotes, I believe, from Goethe in there. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Viktor Frankl became a pilot very late in life.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, and he has a wonderful video, which I can post, where he introduces the concept for pilots dealing with crosswinds. And I won't try and explain what that is, but the crosswinds, I think everybody can assume what that means and how you steer the plane if you're encountering crosswinds. And rather than talking about crabbing, which people can look at the video if they care to, I'm just fascinated with your encounter with Viktor Frankl in particular, and obviously connected to purpose and meaning and everything else that comes along with the human condition.
Yeah, and I actually read for the first time his book. I think it was 3 years ago. It's part of the research for the book. And what is so striking in his writings is this idea that work is one of the few ways, there's not that many, work is one of the ways we can find meaning in our life. And if we, if we step back, work is essential to humanity. That there's no, vegetables don't work, stones don't work, animals. I know, Kristin, you have a lot of experience with animals. I don't think technically animals really work in the same way that human beings do. So it's essential to our humanity. Now, of course, work has got a mixed reputation. The word work in French is travail, which comes from Latin tripalium, which is an instrument of torture. So this is not really good. But I love Viktor Frankl's very optimistic view, which of course saved his life, of finding meaning in our work. And I think if we can and connect that search for that individual search for meaning that every individual has with the job they're in charge of, then that's when miracles happen. And to the wins, Craig, when I joined Best Buy, there was a big rhetoric around the reason why, that was the previous management team. They were saying the reason why we're struggling is because of the headwinds. So not crosswinds, but headwinds. Price deflation, growth of online, all of these wonderful factors. And I thought about calling Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook and asked them, so how is the wind where you're sailing? And they would have said, oh, you're there, the wind, it's fabulous. We're having the time of our life. And so I would have concluded wind is not the problem. We must be the problem. And so I think in life, one of the sources of wisdom is to focus on what you can control and not promote leaders because they have the best possible excuses.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Great. Our next question is from Christoph's. I hope I
Hi.
pronounced your name right. Hi.
Thank you. Hubert, one of the things of the many things that you did when you came into Best Buy stands out as to me, stands out as something not necessarily that obvious, was grooming the relationship with the former founder who was trying to take over the company again. And I would think lawyers and investors and owners and shareholders probably would have preferred that you didn't spend that time. And I'd like to, given the risk, right? I'd like to understand a little bit your thought process and how that played out.
So thank you. So Dick Schultz, the founder of Best Buy, was very angry with the deteriorating situation, and so attempted to do a take private. I didn't know Dick at the time. I knew one of his partners, Brad Anderson, who had been the second CEO of the company. And my sense was that they wanted to do good things for the company. When I joined the company, it was a bizarre situation, right? Because it was a house divided, right? The founder was fighting with the board. And what I told the management team and the employees, look, as far as I'm concerned, Dick is our founder. He's also our largest shareholder. Now, whether we are public or private, he's still going to be our founder and our largest shareholder. So I think we all work for him. And let's focus on doing what he would want, which is, rebuild the company. Now, the take private attempt did not work. It couldn't. Nobody thought we could save Best Buy, so none of the private equity firms could do a deal. But I cultivated, Dick as our founder and largest shareholder, and told him, look, whether you can do a deal or not, I'd love for you to be involved, right? And advise me and that we work together. But of course, it was clear that this was not going to be under any circumstances. In January, February of 2013, we talked about doing potentially a PIPE, so a private investment in a public entity. But the terms that the private equity players wanted were unacceptable. To be technical, they wanted a reset on the strike price of the warrants, meaning they wanted a downside protection. And if I had gone to Fidelity or one of the other public investors and said, how'd you like that? They would say, can I get a reset on the strike price of warrants as well? Can I get downside? Of course not. And so we said no. But I continued to talk with Dick and say, if you if you want to collaborate, that would be great. Now, one of the things he had said was if they would be able to do the take private, they would have kept me as CEO, thank you. But my role was going to be to implement their plan. And then I said, really, I'm very, very good at taking input. I have these two big ears, but I'm really not good at taking direction. And Dick, I'm assuming you're the same, right? And so so if we were going to work together, it had to be clear under what term, meaning he could provide advice, but they can only be a CEO. And so in April of 2013, he became chairman emeritus, an honorary title, not on the board, and he became my advisor. And I think that led to a positive relationship. Somebody who's created a $50 billion company cannot be entirely stupid. And culturally, for the employees, it was so much better. And it's one of these things where, other than the pandemic, there's another pandemic, which is the pandemic around zero-sum games. The only way for Kristin to win is if I lose. I don't think so. And so I felt that, if we were united, we would be, it couldn't beat us, but divided, it was a distraction. So I felt it was worthwhile to effectuate this reconciliation without compromising on governance principles. But that was my judgment. And of course, now Dick calls me his dear friend because the share price, the low was 11, I think, and now it's 120 or whatever the number is. So I'm his dear friend.
Thank you, Hubert. We have one more question, Chris. After that, you have no more standardization. I know there's so much that you and Hubert want to speak about. Our next question is by Nagaraja. Nagaraja, yes.
Thank you very much. I take 30 seconds to acknowledge Hubert. I met you in November 5th in New York City, 2019, along with the 650 women executives C-suite for a breakfast meeting. I did not acknowledge you. I just gave a shake hand. I passed by because I was meeting the financial institute like Bank of America CEO and TIA chairman and Bloomberg chairman. But when you took the podium, you were one of the six men that took the podium and spoke about why Best Buy you recognize for 40% to 50% of the women corporate leaders on their boards. And I scratched my head and I said, how did I miss that? So, and ever since, now I got your book and I finished reading on, and you can see my background, the Harvard Business School. So hopefully I will see you, I'll get to meet you again in person. My question is, transition from the CEO role, a successful CEO role, and into the academia, into the Harvard Business School, two parts is how fulfilling it is, and do you regret leaving the Best Buy? Because as I said, it's a 120 the stock price and top of the market. But joining at the Harvard Business School, building the new leadership teams, which is you balance out is the best way to do it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and at some point, all of us has to face this decision about what what's the next chapter. And there was a point where I felt it was time for me to pass the baton of CEO at Best Buy. Arguably, we had accomplished a lot of what I had wanted to accomplish. We had built an amazing team, and I felt that they were not laughing as hard at my jokes because they had heard them too many times, and they were ready to create their own jokes. And I had been a CEO for, depending on how you count, 15 to 20 years of different companies. And right, Kristin, these are not full-time jobs; they're all-the-time jobs, and there's a time for everything. So at that point, I felt, we had worked on executive development. I felt very good that there was somebody ready to be a great CEO. And if anything, I underestimated how great Corey was going to be. I thought she was going to be amazing, and I underestimated her. But at the time, then I made three decisions. One, I was not going to move south to Florida to play golf with aging white men because I don't play golf. So how stupid would that be? Two, I was not going to be a CEO anymore. I've been there, done that. And three, I wanted the next chapter, next 10, 15, 20 years to matter. And still with the same purpose. So here's a slight point, which is I was never the CEO of Best Buy. Right? I had that job for many years, but this was not who I was. And so when I don't have the job of CEO of Best Buy, I'm still me, right? I've not lost anything. And my purpose has not changed. It's to try to make a positive difference on people around me, and then use the platform I have to make a positive difference in the world. And my calling today is and that's why I wrote this book, and that's why I'm teaching at Howard, is to add my voice and my energy to this urgent and necessary refoundation of business and capitalism around purpose and humanity. And I feel with the credibility attached to the Best Buy turnaround and what I've learned, I have a contribution that I want to make, and that gives me enormous joy. So the criteria I use to decide what I want to do is it meaningful, impactful, and joyful? And so what I'm doing now is very meaningful, very impactful, I hope, and certainly very joyful. And teaching is one of the greatest, joys in life. Now, it's been an interesting journey because when I joined the faculty, the dean at this school up north told me, Hubert, we can debate whether you have been a good CEO or not. Some people will say yes, but there's no debate. You don't know how to teach. So I am a young Padawan, and I'm trying to learn. I'm trying my best to learn how to be a good teacher. But what joy to be working with the rest of the faculty and then the students and both the MBA and then executive education and giving back and helping the next generation of leaders to be the biggest version of themselves.
Thank you.
So, Kalpana, are there any more questions before I jump to a new one from me?
Well, right now we don't have any more raised hands. So why don't we just turn it over to you, Kristin, because there's something you and Hubert want to speak about.
Sure. Well, one of the things that you referenced earlier, Hubert, and I don't know if you remember, we were on a CEO forum, I want to say back in July. And you may be a white man that isn't going to go to Florida to play golf, but you are a white man who's been pretty outspoken on the importance of being seen, as you talked about before, and around diversity and inclusion, and the importance that has as a society and as a corporation. And I found those was before I knew about your book. It was before I got my preview copy. I wonder if you might share some of that. I think it was quite inspiring. You've certainly put in a female CEO, and you've demonstrated your company the value of it, but you've also been pretty outspoken. So I would love for the audience to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and it's so multi-layered. The headline is that diversity and inclusion is not a sideshow. It's not something you do so that you can do a report where you brag about what you've been doing. This is essential at so many different levels, of course, from a business standpoint, also from a moral and societal standpoint. It starts from a business standpoint, where if you can have everyone at the company feel that they're seen and that they belong, and that they can be the best version of themselves, this is how you create great outcomes. It starts with each individual, but you also have to look at the systemic issues that are significant around gender and race or ethnicity in particular, but any dimension in general. Earlier in my career, I'd been quite passionate about gender diversity, and throughout my time at Best Buy, I always had half of my direct reports were women, to the point where sometimes I had meetings in my office where I was only surrounded by women. I had to ask them, so now that you are in the majority, are you going to be kinder, gentler with us than we were when we were the majority? And they said, absolutely not. But I do believe that gender diversity is essential. It brings a much richer environments, much better environment. So this one is a no-brainer. And then it's in 2016 that I became passionate about racial diversity. And I knew intellectually that McKinsey has done all of these studies that it makes a difference. But at that time, we were seeing the employee engagement scores really go up significantly at the company. But you always look at, by region, by level, and also by gender and race. And what I was seeing is that there were significant differences in variation across race. And so I did a few focus groups with managers and skip level focus groups. I'm sure you do this as well, Kristin. And what I heard, I really took a punch in the stomach. The experience of our Black colleagues, was materially worse than any other group, and it was really not good. And I use as an excuse that I grew up in France. So in France, there's racism, but it's a different history. And so I use that to say I need to learn more about this because I don't know. So I got a reverse mentor, Laura Gladney, a wonderful young African-American mother of two wonderful children. Learned a lot from her. One of the things we've learned, I think, Kristin, in these times is as leaders, a key phrase for us is, I don't know, I need to find out. So I reached out to Melody Hobson and asked her for advice, and she's of course the co-CEO of Ariel Investments and now chair of Starbucks. And one thing she told me is that you cannot be who you cannot see. And by that she meant, you need to make sure that the top of the company, the board, the management team, reflects, who you want to be. That's how we put a lot of emphasis on adding diversity on our board. We had gender diversity, but now, when I stepped down from the board, we had 3 Black directors, wonderful, of course, Black directors. And then she made it again in simple business terms, right? If as a company, if your leadership team and your organization does not reflect the customers you're trying to serve in the community, you're going to miss. And there's many examples of that. And the last thing I would say is that if you're based in Minneapolis and following the murder of George Floyd, I mean, if the city is on fire, you cannot run the company. And so that's where you have to make this declaration of interdependence, and where as a company I need to feel responsible for the well-being of the city because I depend on that city. Now, what makes me optimistic around ending or shrinking systemic racism in this country is that many leaders, self-included, have now made the journey not just from the head, right, but also from the heart and the guts, and see this now as a major priority. Boards are holding management teams accountable. Specific goals are being set and are being regularly reviewed. And one of the convictions I have is that in the corporate world, once we have decided that something was a priority, a business priority, in general, our batting average with execution is not bad. And so it's a matter of deploying to this area the same skills that we deploy for any other area. The reason we have not made more progress historically is we did not. We paid, I think, as collectively, I think it's okay to say it, we paid lip service. It was not serious enough. It was not a deep enough priority. I feel this is changing, and I think that this generation has the opportunity in the next 10 years to make a significant difference, provided we stay with it. But I think people will now. There's no going back.
So speaking of things that people probably paid lip service to for a while, but I think is really truly changing, and that you talk a little bit about in the book, is not just the people side of it and the profits and the corporate, but the environment, and looking at sustainability more broadly. And I would say for a long time this was sort of some people would mention it or they'd put out a nice report, but it really has become an imperative. And I think can you share your sort of thoughts on how that fits into the heart of business?
Well, it's back to this declaration of interdependence, right? The heart of business is about pursuing noble purpose, people at the center, embracing all stakeholders, and treating profit as an outcome in a holistic fashion. According to Larry Fink, the environment or climate change is the biggest business risk we have ahead of us. There's a certain Bill Gates who's published a book in February around what it's going to take to get to net zero. And we have a ticking time bomb. I happen to have 3 beautiful, extraordinary, very young granddaughters between the ages of 6 months and 2.5 years. I want to do my best to make sure that what they inherit as a planet is not a complete, mess and chaos. And so I think we're seeing companies, I sit on several boards and I interact with a bunch of CEOs. Everybody now is very seriously mobilizing on their net zero plan, most of the time by 2040. And that's not that far out. And so there's a sense of urgency around. And the good thing is that in most cases, now governments may have to do a better job with, carbon taxes and so forth, but in most cases, you can make a huge dent into your carbon footprint in a way that makes business sense in the current context. The challenge, I think, is that there's some innovations that still need to be made, according to Bill Gates, who knows a bit more about that than I do, so that we can really get there from here. But it's a ticking time bomb.
No, I agree, but I also think it is a business imperative. And it may be that some companies were brought kicking and screaming by receiving a Larry Fink letter. But I think they're starting to realize that, investors do care. Yeah. It was the right thing to do, but there is alignment. I do think it's gaining speed, and I think it does get to the heart of business. So look, this has been absolutely amazing, Hubert. So thank you for being who you are, and for generously sharing your time and thoughts with us. And the heart of business is certainly close to my heart, for all the values I think that it highlights. So on behalf of the Deming Center and Columbia Business School, I want to thank you for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. And I hope that the values of purposeful, people-centered leadership will continue to resonate with all of you. And thank you for everyone to join. Stay well, stay safe and healthy. And thanks once again for joining us today.